All the lights are on.
You may be able to hear us, but the mic is
Yes,
not
now
on.
we're on.
Hey, there we
Testing,
go.
testing,
Okay.
testing. I don't think
Okay.
Oh, that feels like
Now,
something
can you
from
see?
the Hunger Games.
Let me know when we should start. What?
Now it's too loud?
Is that too loud? It feels like I'm in an echo chamber.
Turn down the reverb
Start
a little.
singing and
Well,
get
we're
that
in a chamber.
reverb.
Commissioner Curry.
All right, we can begin. All right, calling the meeting to order at 6:35. Starting out with announcements. Are there any announcements? Moving on to public appearance for items that are not on the agenda. We have one, or maybe more. He's down here.
Thank you, Commissioners. My name is Jonathan Greenberg. I live in Sebastopol. I'm a father of a 6- and 9-year-old who use the library.
We don't have a microphone.
I don't have a microphone at all? Okay. Can I just talk loud?
No.
You should.
With me.
Okay. It's fine with me. I'm from Sebastopol, and I just would like to, to first express my thanks to the Commissioners for allocating the resources in sparse times to really create what really seems to be the only opportunity we have to adequately fund our libraries, to restore ours, to put them on a strong financial footing for the future, and even to have a thriving library system. It was a lot of money to do this poll, but I think the work was really important. And it's part of an effort to call attention countywide to the fact that this will pass if we could get the supervisors to put it on the ballot. We'll be launching tomorrow the RestoreLibraryHours.com campaign, relaunching it with a petition and a Facebook group and all sorts of things like that to raise awareness, of how underfunded our libraries is, how there is simply not enough funding to restore the hours, and how little relative to the sales measure, 1/16 of 1% sales tax, or a similar type of parcel tax, or perhaps a little bit more, could really put a great footing on and potentially do wonderful things for the future, such as develop and plan a new library in Roseland for the underserved community, which could act as the finest kind of community anchor and hub, for the community. So it's a thriving libraries opportunity. And my fear is that if we don't get this done timely this summer, the sales tax will cap out or hit a ceiling, and it will be 2016 or never, and this will be the new normal. So I just want to say I appreciate the Commission in seeing that this is not the new normal, or hoping that it isn't, and really raising awareness through this poll. And my request for you guys is that you can find a way over the next few months to express your support officially for a tax revenue, whichever one you decide, whether it's a 16th or whether it's joined with road taxes, whether it's an 8th or a parcel tax, and that you authorize, through your discussion tonight, the commissioners to report back to their supervisors of their preference for a tax measure, and those things would be really appreciated. And again, I want to thank you and thank the interim directors for managing a wonderful process. The survey was worth every penny, and it really sheds some light and really puts the wind in our sails. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other public comment? All right. Moving on to the portion of the agenda that has to do with presentations from labs. It does feel like the volume's a little too much, but I would. Are there any labs that wish to be presenting? No. That may be better. All right. Okay. Moving on to the special presentation, the results of the presentation of the results of the survey. You want to introduce us, David? Sure. All right.
So with us tonight is Brian Godbee, who is the person in charge of Godbee Research, I believe. Named it after yourself.
Yeah, my wife actually is in charge. I just work.
That's great. I love that. And Brian has been extremely helpful in helping craft the survey in its form and in its content, and he knows the most about how to interpret the results, and I'm just going to turn it right over to him. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Is this mic working? No. I think that's as far as it goes.
It's clicking, so.
Okay. That sounds better, yeah. All right. Thank you, David. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Library Commission. Pleased to be here this evening to present the results of the survey. This is the summary version of that. There are literally thousands of pages of data, but I think it all points in the same direction that a sales tax particularly is a viable option for you, and we'll talk more about that. Let's see. There we go. As you know, the Commission commissioned Godbee Research to conduct the survey of local voters to really look at a couple different things, to look at voter support for a library revenue measure, either a sales tax or a parcel tax, that would restore hours, enhance collections, extend programs and services, maintain...
Would you please speak up?
Certainly.
You don't have a mic that's really amplifying your voice.
Okay. To look at a variety of different tax types, as I mentioned, a parcel tax or a sales tax, the amount of those taxes, each one, and the duration of those measures. Then also to look at various projects and programs, how the money might be spent should the voters approve it, as well as looking at both supporting and opposing arguments and how those might impact overall support for a measure. Of course, there are a variety of demographic and behavioral characteristics that make up the basis of our analysis. The survey was a telephone interview. The universe of people that we called from were the likely November 2014 voters in the county. We were in the field from mid-March through mid-late March, the 18th. The average survey was 18 minutes long. We interviewed 605 likely November voters in all, and those were complete interviews. And that gives us an error rate of plus or minus 4% for the overall data. When we look at the split samples, which we'll talk about in a moment, for the parcel tax versus the sales tax, that's about 300 interviews on either side of the equation and an error rate of plus or minus 5.7%. So jumping into the data, the first question that we asked was actually a series of questions, and it was how important are a variety of different items to the voters in the community. The way we ask this question is we rotate the order of the items that you see on the left-hand side of the slide, and then ask people after each one, is that extremely important, very important, somewhat important, or not at all important? When we're done with the interviewing, we go back and we assign numeric values to the response categories so that an extremely important gets a 3, a very important a 2, a somewhat important a 1, and not at all important a 0, as you see across the bottom of that chart. That gives us the ability in a more nuanced way to compare these responses. And what we look for is about a 0.2 difference to mean that something is statistically significant or that there's a difference between one item and the next item. And that's how we create the tiers that you see in this particular chart. So the top tier items are maintaining and improving streets and roads at 2.11. That ranking, again, it's a more nuanced way for us to look at just one number rather than 4, but that ranking equates to 82% saying at least very important. So that's a big chunk of the voters. The second item in Tier 1, again, virtually at the same level statistically, is maintaining and improving public safety, and that 2.01 equates to about 75%, at least very important, so very or extremely important. In our second tier, we have maintaining and improving local parks, maintaining library hours and services, obviously what we're here for this evening, and then the other side of the equation, which is preventing local tax increases. All of those are in Tier 2 and range from a 1.85 on our particular scale to a 1.74. Again, those are all statistically the same. In terms of percentages, extremely or very important, they range from 66% on a high down to 56% on the low. Of course, 56% is the preventing local tax increases, so that's pretty high. Just to give you a point of comparison, that 1.74, were we in Marin County, would be 1.61, because we asked the exact same question in there before they put their library measure for renewal back on the ballot for this June. They'll be on the ballot, have an election in a month and a half. And then our final tier is updating and adding classrooms and labs at Santa Rosa Junior College, and that was a 1.54 on our scale, or 51% at least, somewhat more likely. So that gives you a sense of what the issues of importance in the voters' minds are. And the good news for the library is that we are above preventing local tax increases. So maybe somewhat less exciting news is that we're below some of the other things that might be the focus of tax measures in the county. At that point, we jumped into actual ballot questions, and this is where we did the split sample that I mentioned. So what we did here is we randomly assigned half of the respondents, half of that 605, to the sales tax and half to the parcel tax. So you see 299 here, there's 306 on the other side of the equation. You can't actually shut off your phone calling right when you hit 300, so that's why we get a little over or a little under, because somebody's always still doing an interview. So what we did in this particular question, and the parcel tax as well, is we read the question that you see on the right-hand side of the slide. It approximates what we would put on the ballot. We're allowed 75 words, and this is in that range. And what we're doing is sort of trying to figure out what the best measure would be based on our experience in other counties, and that's what we've crafted here. This is a 1/8 cent sales tax. We read that to the respondents, and then we say, would you vote yes or no? After we get a response to that, we then drill down, is that definitely yes or probably yes? Same thing on the negative side of the equation. And so you can look at both the intensity and the aggregate number. From an analytical perspective, to assess feasibility, we first look at the aggregate, and at 71%, that's a great place to start. There's no question about it. With the error rate of 5.7 or 6% in round numbers, we're a little below the 2/3 we'd need to be at for a special library tax. But nonetheless, that's with no other information than what you see on the slide. And that's a very, very positive place to be. The 45 or 46 to 26 ratio in the definitely to probably yes is also a pretty positive place to be. We like to see something on the order of 2 to 1. Now, looking at the parcel tax, again, same methodology where we crafted a ballot question, but this time talked about per parcel levy. You can see that there is a different result. We're at 54% yes versus 40% no. This measure still requires a 2/3 majority as well to be successful, so we are well below that level. While not a horrible place to be, it's certainly a very long way from 54 to 66.7. And if you apply the error rate as I did with the sales tax, this could be as low as 48%, and so that's even further. And I think part of that is not surprising to me, in that we always see sales taxes and bonds test better than parcel taxes, and that's, we believe, given our experience over the years, because there is a specific dollar amount in a parcel tax, and it's as simple as that. For sales taxes and bonds, it doesn't say how much the individual voter pays. It gives them a rate for sales tax, and it gives them a gross amount for bond measure. But parcel taxes have that, shall we tax $49? And that's the big difference. At that point in the survey, we came back and everybody in the sample responded to the next questions that we have. We had a list that you see summarized on the left-hand side of the slide. And what we did here is, in a random order, we asked each one of these items and said, would you be more or less likely to support the measure if you knew that the money would be used in this fashion? We then drill down a second step and say, is that much more likely or somewhat more likely? And we did the same thing that we talked about earlier. We assigned numeric values to the response categories because it's difficult to look at 5 different numbers and figure out what the nuances in each might be. And so what we did here is a much more likely response gets a 2, a somewhat more likely a 1, a no effect 0, a somewhat less likely a -1, and a much less likely a -2. So you have a scale that runs from -2 if everybody were much less likely to a +2 if everybody were much more likely. Using the same methodological approach of a 0.2 difference being statistically significant, we create the tiers that you see on the slide here. And in our top tier, we have maintain children's programs and services, provide children, teen, senior, and disabled programs, and keep library staff from being laid off. All in our top tier, ranging from 1.12 down to 0.9. And in terms of percentages more likely, that ranges from 71%, at least somewhat more likely, up to 76%, at least somewhat more likely. So above the 2/3 threshold that we need. So all of those are good things to spend the money on. It might suggest that we reorder those bullets that we had in our ballot question slightly to focus more on the children's programs. But you'll see in a moment that doesn't mean that hours are not something that's important either. In our second tier, we have things that range from a 0.82 down to a 0.62. In terms of percentages, they are a high of 67% and a low of 58%, at least somewhat more likely. So you can see we're below the 2/3 level, or right at it, below the 2/3 level that we need to be at. Extending library hours, or extending library service to underserved communities is the top of those, and that's the one at 67. And then from there we go down. Maintain enhanced library facilities, maintain library book and material collections, and on down the list, which I won't read all of. Our third tier starts at with enhanced book and downloadable collections at 0.61 or 59%, at least somewhat more likely to support the measure. So while positive, it's substantially below the 2/3 that we need to pass this kind of measure. So important, but not top importance. And then in our final tier, we have update library lighting, furniture, and seating at 0.12. Slightly positive, 43%, at least somewhat more likely. So our next question, or set of questions, really looks much the same in terms of the chart, although there are some key differences. One, we identify these as arguments that supporters might make. So these are supporting statements, and we're looking to try to be a little more argumentative. We'll talk about the opposite side of the equation on the negative side in a moment. But what we do here is essentially the same, although again the minor difference is, since we've identified these as statements coming from supporters, it never makes sense to people on the phone that they would be less likely to support the measure based on hearing one of these items. So the scale that we used on the previous question we don't use here. We change it to just much more likely 2, somewhat more likely 1, no effect 0, and there is no negative side of the equation. So what that means is you can still use the numeric rankings to compare these items internally. You can't compare the numbers apples to apples with the previous question. But it is still a very useful tool for figuring out what are our top tier items. And you can see the good news is we have a lot of items here. All dollars will be controlled locally and go to our local libraries. This is a summary as well, and what's not in there, because it just doesn't fit, is and can't be taken by the state. That is the number one argument in every community and every tax that we've done in the last 6 years. And if it's not the number one, it's tied for number one with something else. That 1.28 equates to 73%, at least somewhat more likely to support the measure based on that. So that local control is critical to the success of this measure. Library hours have been cut 25% since 2011. And that's where we talk about the hours again. That one is a little more nuanced, and because it seems a little confusing compared to the previous question, I just want to read all of it. Its library hours have been cut by 25% since 2011. This measure will pay for restoring hours and services at all library branches. So it is mostly hours, but it is also services as well. And that 1.21 is 70%, at least somewhat more likely to support the measure. Drastic cuts to schools and students are more reliant on the library is a similarly highly ranked argument. Prevent library hours from being cut again in the future. Again, at the same level, all of these are statistically the same. 30,000 children participate in Sonoma County library programs, rounds out the top 5 within Tier 1, all above 2/3, at least somewhat more likely to support the measure. A variety of other positive arguments, and going down to the bottom of Tier 1, low-income residents rely on our public libraries at 1.09. That, too, is very positive. It's 65%, at least somewhat more likely, so you can see it's a little bit below where we were with those top 5 items, but it's still nearly at the 2/3 level that we need to be successful. The good news is there's a lot to work with here, and I think we could craft a ballot measure that would be successful, and I think there is a series of messages that would be successful or could be successful if a campaign is able to communicate them. In Tier 2, there are a variety of items that are below that 65% or below that 2/3 threshold, and I won't read all of those. They're all positive and above a simple majority, but again, they're just not big drivers. And in campaigns like this, you really want to be focused on those things at the top of the list, and it's usually 3 or 4 items is about all you've got time for. So repeating those is critical. As I mentioned in passing just a moment ago, we'll look at the opposition side of the coin too, and that's what this chart is. It's the same methodology that we just discussed. We identify these as statements that would come from opponents of the measure. We read them in a random order, and then we assign numeric values in the same fashion that I just described for the positives. We don't put a minus sign in front of them to make them seem bad, so the bigger the number is, the worse it is for us. And there are some that we need to be aware of. At the top of this list is the state increased sales taxes and income taxes last year. That actually was a more complicated item too, so I should read that so you know exactly what we're talking about. It was the state increased sales and income taxes last year. That's Prop 30, of course. And Sonoma County voters have already voted to support hundreds of millions of dollars of parcel taxes, bond measures, local sales taxes. This year there will be even more new property taxes and other county sales taxes on the ballot. We just can't afford this new tax too. So it's sort of the we're paying a lot in other taxes argument. That 0.76 equates to at least 48%, somewhat more likely to oppose the measure. So that's above the 1/3 necessary to defeat a library sales tax or parcel tax for that matter. So that's something that we need to be aware of. And it's out there, and it's not something that's going to go away. We need to be able to really get our message out and explain why it is important in the face of those other measures. Can't trust the county bureaucrats to spend the money the way it's promised. That's a fairly typical anti-tax argument up and down the state. That 0.66 equates to 41%, at least somewhat more likely to oppose the measure. So going to have to give them some guarantees, and one of the guarantees is usually just the full text of the ballot question or the ballot measure that says here are the things we're going to spend the money on, and being definitive in the same order that we've identified the features of the measure to be successful. That will help answer that question as well as to get across our main point. The current economic recovery is very fragile. Now is not the right time. At 0.63 also is a 41%, at least somewhat more likely to oppose the measure. We hope that the economy gets better by the fall. Obviously, we don't have a lot to do with that, but that's a fairly common argument that we've seen of late. And then finally, in our top tier is the dollars used to increase already bloated government employees' salaries and benefits. It's the one of the most common arguments that we see up and down the state. I mean, it's easy to attack on salaries and pensions. The good news, it's actually slipped a little bit. Two or 3 years ago, when we were still more in the recession, this was actually had a lot more impact than it's having here or in other places. We saw it in the 0.8, 0.9. 2 years ago, we even saw it at 1.1. So it's coming down. I think people are less concerned about it as the economy gets better. That 0.6, though, equates to 39%, at least somewhat more likely to oppose the measure. So we're just a little bit above the 2/3 or 1/3 threshold to defeat a measure. And then at the bottom of the list, and heartening to know, the argument that the internet provides all the solutions in the world, and we don't need libraries, in essence, gets a 0.43, and only 26%, at least somewhat more likely to support the measure. So a supermajority don't believe that. They don't think the internet is the solution, and that's good news. So at this point in the survey, we've talked about the ballot questions. We've talked about how we might spend the money. We've talked about positives. We've talked about negatives. But all are sort of in isolation. We don't ask them to compare each of this long list of items with themselves. What we do next is we come back to the ballot question and say, okay, now that you know more about the measure, what do you think? So we're forcing them to synthesize all that information. It's a bit analogous to what happens in a campaign. And so we come back to that same ballot question. Here we see in round numbers, we have 70% that are yes. That's a little bit lower than the 71% we started with. Statistically, it is insignificant, and so it's almost not even worth talking about the difference. There is also a similarly insignificant increase in the definitely yeses, so the intensity of support has gone up, but really statistically we're at the same level as we were when we started. While we would like it to go higher, I think that's still not a bad place to be, given that we had some pretty hard-hitting negatives. And it becomes a question in the real world after measures on the ballot is how good a job does the positive independent campaign do versus the negative campaign. The positive campaign often has more research sources in terms of financial as well as volunteer. The opposition campaign usually is limited to a ballot argument, which is important, but the ratio is the key. And I think if we've got enough things to talk about, that we could help improve this and maybe even get above the error rate, which would be where we'd want to be. The next question was asked of those people that weren't definitely yes, but then we recoded it to include everybody in the sample. And basically we're falling back and saying, well, instead of 1/8%, what if it was only 1/10? And what's interesting here is the definitely yeses go up from 48 to 55%, but the overall support doesn't change. We're still at 69%. So reducing the tax rate doesn't necessarily help you, and the negatives are still at the same place we were before. We were at 27% on the second test, and now we're at 28. So reducing it on balance doesn't help. You might as well go for the 1/8% rather than cutting it back. The next question that we asked of the respondents was then, how long should the measure be for? We started high at 9 years and worked down, because if you go the other way, after the first number, everybody says no, because they figure it out. At 9 years, we get 68%. At 7, virtually the same level. There's a little bit of a dip, but it's not statistically significant, to 67%, although the intensity has gone up. The definitely yes is higher. Then at 5 years, we're at 69%, and 3 years, we remain at 69%, but just a numerically higher, definitely yes, not significant from a statistical perspective. So what that suggests is that somewhere in the, depending on your risk tolerance, somewhere in any of this range is acceptable. But if you're trying to increase support, being a little shorter makes the voters feel like there's more accountability. And what we see in most of the measures that happened the first time, and certainly Marin was a good example of this, while they had similar numbers, they went out for 4 years, which is why they're on the ballot in this June, is because they have to renew their sales tax. Now, they also had their parcel tax. They also had another parcel tax, which you may be familiar with, which actually, through a quirk of the drafting, became in perpetuity from the minute it was passed. That was never the intention, but, somebody in the legal team slipped. I worked on that 15 years ago, and I'm still not sure what happened. And David was obviously there when it happened as well. None of us really understand it, but it's a good thing. So anyway, when they went out for their second parcel tax, they did 4 years for the same reason. I think it makes some sense to be a little shorter here, even though that puts you in campaign mode again in a relatively quick fashion. It's better to obviously pass in the short term and then show what you can do with it, and then you can go out for longer terms, which is what they're doing as well. So then flipping to the other side of the equation, which is the parcel tax, we come back to the same ballot question yet again here as well, and we go from 54% in round numbers to 62%. So what's heartening is there's an 8% increase in the parcel tax support. The challenge is it's still not 2/3. And getting from 62% to 66.7 is a very, very long way for a parcel tax measure. So I think that the sales tax is more viable for the reasons I stated earlier. We did also, though, go through the different tax rates, and that's what this chart shows. At $57, which is higher than the $49, and that's intentional because in this kind of question, there's what's called a context bias. And what that means is that whenever you're doing a bargaining game, and the voters identify this as a bargaining game, they know that the answer to the first question in any extended bargaining game is no. And you wait the person out until they get to a lower number. You can't do that with a sales tax because there's only one other number. But for parcel taxes, we often throw this higher number in to help get rid of that context bias. People can say no. We get 56% here, which is a little lower than we had on the previous. Then we go back to 49, and we get 62 again, and then we're sort of dealing, without the bias. And at 41, we're at 62, so there's no real change there. At $33, dropping below what's probably a psychological ceiling at $39.95, if you will, priced just like everything at Target is. We get a jump to 67%, although statistically speaking, that's not a significant increase. And then at 25, again below another psychological ceiling, in this case it would probably be $29.95, we get to 70%. So you could get conceivably a parcel tax up to the 2/3 level, but the problem that still exists in all of these questions, we're looking for a tipping point, and ideally we would have found that tipping point in the $49 or the $41 level. When you get too many items, what happens is it's in the context of everything that came before it. And that doesn't happen on the ballot. So I think it's a bit optimistic, and this question always overstates the support at the $25 level, for example, because on election day there's only one parcel tax number, not 5. And so people don't read down in the same fashion as we did. So there's some limitations to the analysis. So I still think that the sales tax is more viable, is what really is the bottom line there. In terms of the duration for parcel tax, again, it's not as relevant since I really think the sales tax is the way to go. At 9 years, we're at 63%, at 7, 62, and at 5, 65, and then 3 years, we're at 67. So you can see we are at lower levels of support than we were for the similar durations for the sales tax. So by way of summary, I think there is a solid base of support for a 1/8 cent sales tax measure. As you know, we had 71% on the first test and then 70% in round numbers on the second test, and I think that's a reasonable place to be. You'd like to cover the error rate, meaning exceed that 5.7% over the 2/3, but most 2/3 measures rarely do that in the survey because 70% is a pretty big majority. and it's hard to get to 80%, for example, or even 75%. So I think that means it is viable, and you should consider moving this forward. Reducing the tax to 1/10% really doesn't help you, so I can't imagine why you'd want to do that. I think the risk is the same whether it is an 1/8 or a 1/10. Contrastingly, as we've talked about, I just don't see the parcel taxes being as viable. The data also suggests that the ballot question could be slightly improved by reordering some of the bullets based on the information we have in the survey, and I think that's important when we're fighting for every point here and there. And really focusing on children's programs and services, providing teen, children, senior, and disabled programs, keeping the library staff from being laid off, and then restoring library hours and services that have been cut. And again, I think that it makes sense to try to move this forward for the November 2014 ballot. So that's a summary of the data. I'm certainly happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Shall we go down the table and see what questions we have, Tom?
I don't have any offhand. There's a lot here to digest. And I can't think of a question right offhand. I just don't know. I think I compliment you. You've done an extraordinary job, and I think laid it out very well. I've never been a big fan of charts and graphs, but this does a good job. This tells it what it is. It's good.
Thank you.
Besides Marin, has there been any other county library systems that you've polled for?
Solano County, and they were one of the first actually to pass a sales tax right after the special legislation that allowed libraries to do that back in the late 90s. They just renewed their measure. They had a 16-year sunset initially, and they got 80% when they renewed it. A renewal is a lot easier than passing it the first time.
And just following that up, I know we're a different system, but is there lessons learned from 80% passage from another county?
I think that that particular county, I mean, it was a different time when they passed the measure the first time. It was 2012 when they renewed it. Suggesting that the economy has turned around, but again, it was a renewal. I think what they did really well the first time is they ran a great campaign. The library director was somebody that your co-directors probably know, Ann Cozino, who was also the chair twice of the statewide library bond committee. So she had, as librarians go, a lot of political experience. And they raised a fair amount of money, and they did a very good job using those resources wisely. And I think that's always the key.
Great, thanks.
Do you have any insight on midterm election versus a 4-year election, or June versus November?
Yeah, I think that in this particular case, June was off the table already. Marin is going in June because in the 4 years ago, they actually had more support among seniors in the June election. We didn't have that as an option here just because of the timing. So I think that November is fine. Is November of 2016 better? I can't say for sure. I would guess that it is, just because the turnout is different. There are more younger voters, but the younger voters are going to have to be parents that you're focusing on, not 20-somethings, because 20-somethings aren't really huge library supporters. Not that they're opponents, but the senior group tends to be the biggest supporters, and then parents. So what you would see is more parents turning out naturally in a presidential election year. But then what happens is the universe gets bigger, and so you've got more people to talk to. And so it's a little bit of a catch-22. Smaller election, November 14, more seniors, easier to communicate to. Larger election, more parents, more support, but harder to reach. But we didn't test the November 16 environment, so we don't know that for sure, but I think that makes sense. I think there are other political issues, though, with respect, particularly to a sales tax, in terms of what's the cap and, can you get, because there's a local cap for sales tax, and would it be expended by that time or not? And you may have that issue.
Do you understand the cap issue?
I'm sorry?
Do you understand the cap issue?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
The statewide cap.
Yeah, no, I got that.
Maybe for the sake of everybody else, we could just reiterate what that is, though. And my understanding, and out there, correct me if I'm wrong, but is that there's a 9.5% limit that we can get to. The state starts at 8, and then they let you put on more at the local level, but we're running up against that cap in a couple of places in our county, and especially if you look at proposed sales taxes that are being talked about for November, we're exceeding the cap with our eighth of a penny. We're over the cap in Sebastopol, for instance. So what Brian mentioned was a legislative approach to extend or make a higher cap for a given jurisdiction. And you would have to get a local legislator to bring that forward in the state legislature. And I believe that it's sort of a honor system that if your local assembly person champions that, everyone else votes for that. Alameda County and Contra Costa have done that, and others. So,
Right.
We'll get to comments later.
Can I take my question? Have you any experience where there might be two, not necessarily competing, but two separate sales tax issues on the ballot? One for the library and one for something else?
Not at the countywide level, no. So if you had two countywide measures, that would be, I think, a challenge. And while I think this is positive and you should be moving forward, I think you probably should try to figure out where that's at. I mean, we certainly have had situations where we've had multiple different taxes at different levels. And been successful. So we've had a countywide sales tax for transportation, and then a community college bond measure, and then a local parcel tax for a local school measure, and even a city sales tax. But not two county sales tax measures. That would be a novel situation. But I mean, another answer to that is a library measure is a special tax, requires 2/3. Both San Mateo and Santa Clara County in 2012 passed general sales taxes, which are at the discretion of the Board of Supervisors in each of those counties and how that money gets spent. But it's only a simple majority, and you could spend it on roads and libraries. So that's probably another thing to consider. We didn't survey for that, so I couldn't tell you how well it does, but I think it's reasonable to assume that if the library gets 2/3, that the library combined with something else is going to be able to get a simple majority.
I had another question. I'm assuming based on those various bullet points on what were the winning pitches, that we should be coordinated around enhance our beloved library versus materials or a website that have a specific pitch. Would that be correct?
I think there's always a general theme that any independent campaign will take, but the first thing is these items are useful in prioritizing the bullets that you see in this ballot question. So in the ballot question, we have restore Monday hours, cut system-wide in 2012. Here we found that maintain children's programs and services was at the top of the list. In this next set, we've found that all the money will be controlled locally. Obviously, that's not part of a ballot question, although there is a clause that can fit in there legally. And then library hours have been cut, and this would restore it. So I think there's some tweaking of this list in the ballot question to begin with. And then you want to sort of use that same list over and over and over again, and that becomes the message, is what we're going to spend the money on. Because one of the negatives was we can't trust them. So the more you say, here's what we're going to spend the money on, these categories, you need to leave yourself some flexibility. So it's, you're not picking the book, obviously, that, to use that as a metaphor, that you're going to buy, but that you're going to buy books or that you're going to buy hours or whatever this list becomes. So that would be the focus of the campaign, is repeating that message over and over again.
Thank you.
In your experience, what is the cost of a campaign like this?
It's not inexpensive, and it varies from county to county. And Marin County right now, their library foundation raised approximately $150,000 so far for the June campaign. They actually had more 4 years ago at this stage, but I think they'll get to the same level. They raised about 170, 180 4 years ago. Marin is a smaller library district, so you need to keep that in mind. There are some economies of scale in terms of the consulting, which we don't do. We're just pollsters. But there are campaign consultants that it doesn't matter how big the district is for their work. What does matter is how many mail pieces you can send out.
Thank you. And another question about what's the likelihood of moving likely yeses and likely nos? So those swing voters, if you will.
So the way we analyze that is we aggregate the probably yes and the definitely yes, and we think it is correct to say that you can win them all, and that the likelihood is very high. What the campaign's job is to keep those probably yeses on board. So I sort of think of it as the glass half full becoming less full, rather than the other way around, trying to convince them. You're really just trying to keep them. My rule of thumb is if you don't have a campaign, you just put it on the ballot and crossed your fingers and hoped that it would pass, you'd lose half of the probably yeses. So you'd still get a majority, but you wouldn't get the supermajority. So again, the job of not to belabor it, but the job of the campaign is really to keep those people that are already disposed to you on board, and that's how you win. Getting the probably no's to switch sides is very difficult. Getting the definitely no's is impossible.
And then I have one additional question. Random Sample saw the numbers that you provided us of who the telephone survey went to. Do we have a little more drilled down on what the demographics of some of those people are? I mean, could we identify these people as, have you ever supported the library in the past?
We did not ask that kind of question. We do have more information about who they are from a demographic perspective, meaning age, gender, ethnicity, ethnic surname, actually, partisanship. I would summarize it by saying they're weighted to the actual demographic characteristics of the likely voter universe already. But we do have that information. I just don't have it in a slide format.
And in that demographic information, do we know location?
Yes.
So whether Sebastopol, Santa Rosa, Healdsburg, where they might be in the county?
Yes, we have that.
Thank you.
And that, too, was weighted to make sure that there wasn't some strange sampling error that everybody lived in Santa Rosa. Obviously, this is the larger city, but yes, that's as well.
So thanks for the work that you've done on this poll for us. I have a couple of questions. But first, I want to say that because of this experience with your polling, I answered a poll this weekend that I would normally have said no thank you to. So I appreciate the effort that goes into this.
Thank you for all of the pollsters. It is getting more difficult to get people to answer surveys.
So I know you've stated repeatedly that you support the sales tax and over the parcel tax, and I have to say that I've gone back and forth on those things. But looking at the support during the poll for the parcel tax, it increased by almost like 9 points.
points, yeah, 9
And
points.
what do you attribute that to? Because it looks like some of the definitely no changed to definitely yes.
I think it's because we started at such a low point. As I said, when we looked at the first slide, said it's not horrible, but it's really not a good place to be. So it's relatively easy to get almost any measure that's appropriately written by the end of the survey up to 60% or a little bit higher than that. So I think that's what we did. The trick, though, is getting to 2/3. And so that's where I think we have the problem with the parcel taxes. I just don't see us getting there. I mean, Solano, as I mentioned, did a sales tax because they were able to they have two, well, they're the county library and then they have two small libraries, the Dixon Library and the Benicia Library, but everybody was able to agree. Marin, the numbers were actually similar, at least in terms of there was more support for the sales tax than the parcel tax. Both of their numbers were higher than yours, but Marin never was able to do a sales tax because they couldn't get all the libraries to agree on a sales tax because there are so many different libraries in that system or in that county.
It's just in this, in our situation in this county with so many agencies or entities doing sales taxes this time. And I think we've estimated what we do need as far as income revenue from this. I just kind of hate to see us shoot ourselves in the foot by bumping up against that sales tax cap, whereas if we started out with a parcel tax campaign. Anyway, something for the commission to consider.
My first question is, how often are you wrong?
Good question. We've won 90% of the measures that we recommend be on the ballot. Our percentage actually goes up when you count the ones that we don't count, which are the ones we didn't recommend be on the ballot, and they lost.
Okay.
Then we're into the 93% level, but it's not really fair because nobody wants to lose.
All right. My second question is, I think you've kind of alluded to this, but it feels like we're in a swarm of taxes. You've looked at the taxes, or potential taxes, and it seems to me you've looked at the ones countywide, but I know many of the cities are heading towards this also. Is there any history, past information about somebody just enough? There's just too many taxes. I can't distinguish which one I want to pay, which one I don't want to pay, whatever. Are you aware of how many are possible in the county?
I know there's a lot. I mean, we've actually worked with the Cotati-Rohnert Park School District. They've got a bond measure on the ballot this June. I know that several of the cities are considering sales tax measures. Again, I think that a city sales tax, we've had situations where that has been consistent. In fact, where San Mateo County passed their county-wide sales tax in November 2012, they also had, at least one city had a local sales tax on it, and they were successful. Now, they didn't have the cap problem. That's a different issue, but they were able to be successful. That's a county that has had school bond measure after parcel tax after bond measure over and over and over again. And we've got some clients that have been on the ballot as many as 4 times in the last 6 years. And we don't seem to be hitting that threshold where people just say enough is enough. I think you have to make your case every time. And whether it's fortunate or unfortunate, the voters' memories of what taxes they've really paid are pretty limited, except for a couple times a year when they pull out their tax bill and when somebody tells them what they are.
Which somebody
might do.
Might.
Right.
My next question is related, and it's really a Bruce question, the financial officer question related to our discussion. My memory is that in order to bring us up to staffing for the staffs that it's gone, and the reopening of the Monday hours and extending Saturday was roughly $1.3 million.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yes, that's
Okay.
what I recall.
So if it's $1.3 million, and don't sit down. I'm still, and the 5-year projection that you presented in the budget workshops shows us with a deficit of approximately what in 5 years?
I think that, if I remember correctly, it was a little over $1 million per year that we were going to be.
Please speak up.
I think after 5 years, we were going to be in excess of $1 million a year in a deficit. And the issue that I find alarming on that projection is that it starts eating away at the reserves in 15-16. And we actually postpone eating away at the general fund reserves by transferring some special revenue in for 14-15. And so when you get to out there about 18-19, you're getting to a point of depleting your reserves. So it really becomes a question of if you do not have some sort of additional revenue stream to subsidize just being, for the most part, dependent on property tax for the next at least 5, 8, 10 years, you will have to start, or the new commission will have to start considering what services you're going to start gearing back on. And it'll be significant.
Well, and basically what I'm thinking of is I'm hearing, I mean, we're going to be discussing this longer and more, but I'm hearing a kind of range of a 16th to an 8th. And were we to do a 16th, it would increase our budget by around $4 million. And I'm hearing that essentially 2.3 million of that is essentially earmarked. 1.3 of it is to get the hours up, and then the other million is to account for the decrease in the increase in expenses and the not fast enough increase in income. So essentially, were we to think about a 16th, and that would bring in about $4 million, that would leave us with 1.7 million to do enhanced services and everything else that we're trying to promise. That you can sit back down now. That was my question.
There is one thing I wanted to point up is that that $1 million shortfall is just taking your current budget and extending it. So you've hit on the point of reopening, reestablishing services, and some of the deferred maintenance on the buildings. There's going to be, there was a list of about 5 or 6 items.
Well, and
that's not in there.
Not in that, including the unfunded liability.
Yes, including the unfunded liability.
Okay. Go ahead.
Is it possible to get this presentation in an electronic form?
Yeah, actually, you already have that.
I will get that out. Yeah, we have that from, I didn't want to disseminate it before tonight, but I do have it.
Okay,
So I'll
thank
mail
you.
it out.
Another question I have is time. I have a sense that we're under a time crunch. We cannot decide today or tonight to say, let's go forward with the tax initiative, sales tax, whatever. But there are several elements that are involved, but one of them is getting approval by the Board of Supervisors in time to get on the November. Let's go to that one first.
I could speak to that a little bit. I want to check in with Brian, though, on your time, because you're gracious enough to come all the way
I'm
up
fine.
here. You're fine? Okay. All right. So we've been proceeding in sort of several different tracks simultaneously with the sort of kitchen cabinet that was established to explore this whole possibility, which includes Helena and Julia Fries, as well as Jonathan and Dina, and Barbara McKenzie, and the two of us, and sometimes Bruce. Julia was fortunate enough to be able to make contact with Kathy LaRoque, who was the former Library County Council, and was able to have a meeting with her last week together with our current County Council, Linda Schiltgen. And out of that meeting, which was ostensibly to come up with the ballot language, we heard that it would be really quick to come up with ballot language, but what we really needed to do was get before the county administrator staff and county administrator with this concept, and to get a meeting as soon as possible. So we have scheduled a meeting for Friday with the two of us, and I believe David Ebright is kind enough to be able to attend on behalf of the commission at Tim's request. So the idea would be to go talk through this same presentation, and Brian has also been very gracious and said he would appear on the phone if we need him to explain anything that we were having trouble explaining, and find out just what are they thinking, what's the landscape as far as they're concerned, and is there an option to go forward as far as they're concerned. So that's the first step we were advised to take in terms of getting the board on board, is rather than go to the board members to begin with the administrator's office and explain it at that level. So we're proceeding with that advice.
What is the outside date that the county supervisors have to say yay or nay
August,
in order
first
to
week
get
of
it on the
August.
ballot?
First week of August.
First week in August, okay.
Okay, so that says to me that the commission would have to vote at the latest in July to go forward or not.
To make a recommendation to put it on the agenda for
Right.
the board.
There's also the other issue in terms of timing. One of the things that stood out for me is the $150,000 to $200,000 cost for a campaign, and that would be, if anybody's going to be starting to do that, they probably should start yesterday. Okay, so how can we, what steps or direction do you need or want from the commission tonight? And we'll ask for public input in just a minute.
That's a very good question. I mean, I would appreciate support for moving forward to continue to explore with the county administrator. And also, I would think that you could, among yourselves, decide to begin to make appointments with the bodies that appointed you, to begin to have conversations with those folks, whether it be they Board of Supervisors members or City Council members or mayors, anybody you know, just to start laying the groundwork for support out there in the political realm, because we'll need that if this is going to go forward at all. I think actually it would be great to have every single city spoken to. It would be great to have every single Board of Supervisors member met with. But I think first we really need to do what we've been advised to do, which is to meet with the county administrator and her office staff and talk through all of the data that we've gathered so far, show our 5-year projection, show our spending plan, and see what appetite there is right off the bat. And then if we need to make a case, a stronger case, we'd be able to call in the troops, which would be you.
Well, does the commission feel able to give, I'm going to use a Mike McGuire technique here, people who have been going to the Joint Powers Agreement meetings know what I'm speaking about. How about a thumbs up if you're saying let's proceed exploring, a thumbs sideways if you're not sure, and a thumbs down if you are against it.
Yeah, let's
Yeah,
go.
there's no negative to
yeah.
proceeding. I mean, what's bad about that?
And I'd have to say that if August 1st, if a new commission is in place and they're going to have so much going on to throw this at them too, this commission better do it if we're going to do it. Okay?
Yeah, I think that's,
Yeah.
I
Okay,
agree.
well, there you go.
And I think it needs to be the sales tax, and I think it needs to be 1/8%. If I understood what you said, there was essentially no difference between 1/10 and 1/8. So I wouldn't even contemplate 1/16. I don't know where you got that one from, Tim.
Who will explain?
Well, I believe that Jonathan would be able to explain the 16th since it's on his
Okay,
page.
Jonathan,
and-
would you like to speak to the commission at this point?
Yes, please. Could I
Thank you.
come there?
Oh, come on down. Come on down. Just watch out for the lions.
Sebastopol, I did attend and participate in Sebastopol City Council discussion about this with the council members extensively. And I am sort of the outside budget consultant.
You need to speak up a little louder, please.
Yeah. So the cap thing is really complicated, and David didn't actually express it that well. So that's what I was raising my hand, because it's so complicated. So it turns out that it's not the state, it's that the local government has a taxing authority of 2%. In the past few years, Sonoma County has taken 0.75%, and my city, Sebastopol, has taken 0.75%. And the cap is 2%. Hence, there is a ceiling that gets reached with another 0.5% by any combination of the county or cities that approach that 2%. So since Sebastopol is now suggesting that it wants another 0.25%, having just had a half a cent last year, that means that the county may only have taxing authority of 0.25%, which would raise $16 million. And they may say we need all $16 million to fix roads. However, what I was suggesting earlier and on that paper I handed out is that if this grand bargain that David has spoken of and Jamie have spoken of, is that we go in and say, and this Michael Keyes, our former mayor, supports and thinks is very politically viable. We say, listen, let's do a general county tax with an earmark stated that the libraries get 1/16 of that, or 1/4 of that 1%. Hence, $4 million for libraries, $12 million for roads. So we're sort of weighing the roads 3-to-1 for the money that's needed, and we have essentially what's the problem is Commissioner Arnold, is not that the poll shows 1/8%. The problem is this difficult ceiling. The other thing is if Sebastopol doesn't go forward. So this is how I got mixed up in the beginning. I was saying, well, isn't Petaluma asking for something, or why isn't that consequential? So it's not consequential because it doesn't bring that 2%. So Sebastopol's bringing on the 2%, and that's why we're talking about whether if we go for a whole eighth, it means that roads could only have an eighth, and it's sort of and there's probably not as much appetite that we've heard feedback on for roads. For libraries as there is for roads. But the grand bargain is if we do a general tax and they say this is for roads and libraries, and they carve out that libraries will get 1/4 of it, we'll have $4 million, and according to a number of people, they will have the support of road supporters and library supporters and feel very confident that it will pass. So that's what we're sort of trying to push for as a.
I don't want to get into the deal, but how do you campaign for that? I mean, because we have the basis of a nice campaign, as was laid out by the feedback we got. How do you campaign with this big kind of amorphous tax?
I'm really glad you asked that, Tom, because what Mr. Gosby was talking about was money that is taken once it's on the ballot. I mean, the 150 million he's talking about in Marin, our equivalent to that doesn't even start till August, September, October, November. That's the mailing to turn people out and see that those probablys stay yeses.
150,000.
150,000.
The 150,000.
Yeah.
So we're not at that. This right now, this is a simple public awareness campaign and that's why the campaign to restore library hours is launching tomorrow for this. Our target for donations, by the way, because we don't have a committee, we're not a nonprofit, is $4,500, of which I've committed, and I'm doing it voluntarily. So I'm sort of committing $5,000 or $10,000 in hours, but we got a 200 and 200 cash, and we got a matching grant of 500. All we're trying to do is build pressure so people will talk to supervisors. So there was a little confusion about that. We don't think it's possible in a timely fashion with this kitchen cabinet, to create a nonprofit committee and go forward to raise public awareness. But also the time to do that is, but we can do that sort of on an ad hoc basis individually, which is why it's so important that the commissioners express themselves and build support in your communities. We do have a page on Restore Library Hours that is for expressions of support. There are beautiful comments that people made on Facebook that will be there tomorrow. But we're also looking for the Sebastopol City Council has made a resolution supporting a revenue measure. We don't have to say which one we support, but we would like to individually list the commissioners, if possible, as saying not that you support the 8th versus the 16th, the parcel versus the sales, or the separate tax versus the combined tax, but just that the supervisors put a ballot measure, on the November ballot, because we do feel this is our last opportunity. And I think it's great that you do not pass this off to the new commission, because there may not be another opportunity for a sales tax ceiling. If Sebastopol goes for a quarter cent and the county goes for a quarter cent for roads, we're not even talking about 2016. We are talking about the end of any sales tax opportunity in this county for libraries, unless the state legislature changes that law, which, with Governor Brown, really wanting to be that fiscal hawk, it's very unlikely in my opinion. But
to further answer your question, a general sales tax looks just like this tax measure that we have here. The difference in a general tax is it says, in your case, to fix roads and to improve library hours and children's services and whatever else the county wants. And the last bullet, instead of another library or road thing, is and other services.
And is
That's
that a
what makes it
55% pass?
50%.
50%
That's
pass.
what makes it a general tax. But everything is at the discretion of the Board of Supervisors every year.
But that's one of the problems, isn't it? Because one of the objections in here is, the politicians always do what they want to do with it. So unless we earmark X dollars is going to go to libraries, then it's going to go where it goes.
You can't actually, in a general tax, you can't.
Right.
You can't earmark it. You can only make a political promise, which is here's what we're promising we're going to do, but it is a general tax. Most cities, Sebastopol is one, Santa Rosa is another, have been successful, Cotati is another, have passed general taxes with that problem.
Yeah.
But the difference is between a special tax doesn't have that problem, it has 2/3. General tax has that problem, but only a simple majority. That's all the difference in the world.
But in the way I hear it then is if we went for the general tax, we may or may not get $4 million. And the $4 million that I'm hearing is basically we're treading water on $4 million. We're not really moving forward opening Mondays.
No, we're opening Mondays.
With $4 million.
With $4 million, we're 2.3 for 1.3 is for opening full staffing and opening Mondays. Then the other $1 million is the deficit, the deficit that's coming down the pike.
And how long does that last? Did you say something? I mean, this general tax would last how many years? And then how much money?
There's a number of different things.
Yeah.
So, just so I understand the question, when you said how long does it last, do you mean the deficit, the operating deficit?
Well, that $4 million, at what point does that become, we're back to where we are? We're gonna have to start
Probably,
cutting services.
approximately maybe three years beyond.
Okay.
So 8 years. 8 years.
Okay.
You know, the projection was 5 years, and if you add another 3,
Okay.
4 years, you're going to be back to zero.
Back to zero again. And then how long would this general sales tax last? It varies, 4 years.
Well, one of the
2 years.
things
Yeah.
that about the sales tax is it's more like bridge financing. It's 8, 10 years. What you're wanting is the economy and the housing market and property values to come back, because you're 95% funded by property tax.
Okay.
And so if tax revenues start to come back and grow at 3-4% a year, then property tax values, then when you get out to those out years, your tax revenue starts to come back, and you're able to fund your operation.
Okay.
And at the end of the 10 years, the sales tax drops off, and you've weathered the storm and actually done a few good things in between.
So logically, if I can wrap my mind around this, so logically, our best chance is to go in with the general sales tax for the $4 million, and that kind of bridges till revenues start pouring in with hopefully when the economy gets better. So it seems to me then that the best bet, because we're having various bets here on what's going to work and what isn't, would be the sales tax at 50%.
But on a general tax, are we at the county's mercy then as to how much the library would get over time? There's no set agreement that we would get $4 million.
Do what they want.
That's where public pressure and public awareness is very important, where you get a public statement. I mean, I do believe we're going to get support of the Press Democrat editorially on this, having spoken to them last week. And I do believe, and I'm doing another op-ed on this, and so what we're doing is we're trying to get very clear, commitments in writing, that this is what the intention is, so that it's sort of memorialized for the future. I do want to say that this meeting that Jamie and David are going to on Friday is very important, and I have a lot of concern that they're not going to be specific enough about what the administrator wants to hear. And I believe that having listened to the call with Kathy LaRoque and been part of that, what the administrator is looking to hear is they want to hear what we need and why, and what we could do realistically. So there's this desire among all of us really to have a 1/8 of a cent tax and have $8 million and not $4 million. However, at the same time, to really make the case that people are going to be aware that this is a vital need, and I really appreciate, Tim, you going and saying it's $2.3 million, is what, and I want to say that that $1 million unfunded liability, if you read between the lines of what he said, occurs in 5 years. In other words, next year it's only a couple of $100,000. The next one is $400,000, then 5, 6. The point is there's still an extra $500,000, $700,000, $600,000 each year, and that money could be used to plan and develop a library in Roseland, for example, to add hours, which then could get other funding from foundations and other support, et cetera, that we might be able to move on with a new development, et cetera, et cetera. My point is that there's some money to excite, even with $4 million. We're going to be taking the sizzle out to the community and suggesting what might be done with the money, but it's very important, if there's any guidance and discussion that you could continue to have, that the administrator feels that in my view, that David and Jamie have the support of this commission and have as specific a guidance as possible as to how much money is needed in a realistic perspective. Because if they think we're Pollyanna and asking for, the sky, they're going to be very easy to dismiss us and say they're not realists. They don't really understand what we're dealing with as supervisors.
Tim, I have one quick question, though, because, and I know we're going to.
Who do you want to ask?
Well, whoever can answer the question. So, if we go for the two-thirds majority, about 150,000, excuse me, for the campaign plus, if we go for the 50% with a general tax, how much is that campaign?
Okay, can I interrupt for a second before we get into too deep a detail about campaign and budgets, et cetera? This commission and the library funds will not be able to spend a penny.
Right.
Right.
You understand
I
that?
realize that.
Right. So all of this conversation needs to take part as part of a campaign committee separate from the commission about fundraising, about how to run a political campaign, all of that. There needs to be a registered political campaign with the Fair Political Practices Commission where anybody who writes a check, that check can go into an account that's monitored. So we need to be really careful here to keep these things separated out.
Okay.
What we're doing, what we're trying to do. This body is trying to get a measure on the ballot. Citizens in the community, of which some of them may be us on our off time, would work to pass that ballot measure. And I just want to be sure that we don't get in too deep into a conversation that gets into the machinations of a campaign committee.
Okay, well, that doesn't answer my question.
So I really want to address your concern and raise a point that hasn't been raised yet, which is part of what's so critical about...
I'm sorry, as a new commissioner, I'm sorry, I don't know who you are. Could you state your name for me, please?
I'd be pleased to do that.
Thank you.
I'm Dina Bliss.
Thank you.
From SoCosol. Part of the push, Paul, for getting in front of the Board of Soups is they ultimately decide what goes on the ballot. So we're asking them cooperatively to put us on the ballot with them. The alternative is if they say no, we have to run around getting 8 bazillion signatures, and we don't even have the time to do that. That train actually did leave the station. I'm not sure about those other ones. But that train is gone. We don't physically have the amount of time we need to gather the signatures, have the signatures validated, turn them into the Board of Soups, and then have the Soups say, yes, well, you've played that hand. We have to put it on the ballot. So we're in this incredible time crunch for this year and desperate for your help with the Soups to persuade them that this is in their interest to parlay us with them. The problem with going for the 1/8 is pitting us against them. We're worried that they're going to say, no, we want the money for the roads. We're not interested right now in the... We'll get to you, in 2 years, maybe 3 years, and we'll be in deep trouble, as you know. So that's the urgency. Thank you.
And given my understanding of the current situation, there's a complete likelihood that in the next election, all the caps will have been worn, and there'll be, aside from the possibility of the legislature deciding something, sales tax will be off our plate.
So
Okay.
just to add one thing to that about the legislature, Contra Costa and Alameda County have the legislation done. Most observers think it will get through the legislature. It will not get through as an urgency measure because that requires 2/3, and the Democrats no longer have a 2/3 majority for a variety of reasons. But they also expect the governor to sign it. So if this becomes a discussion with the CAO's office and the board about how much and does the library get and how much do the roads get, the solution is already on the table in Sacramento. But I think moving quickly is critical to get the county to say, yes, we want to be part of that, to the people that are currently sponsoring that, because time is running out on that as well. But I think that solves part of the who gets what battle. And it solves it for Sebastopol too, because the city of El Cerrito is actually asking for another half-cent above what Alameda and Contra Costa are asking for above the current 2% cap. So
Sebastopol could ask for it if we
they
were-
could get more than they
But
want right now. That's right.
if I understood
or they could get
Jonathan-
the authorization to do more than they want now.
If I understood Jonathan correctly, the bottom line is we need, at this point in time, we need the Board of Supervisors to approve a tax measure, right? We can't do it ourselves. And so our issue of negotiation with the county is, do we go for an eighth, a tenth, or whatever of a tax? Will they let us put a tax initiative on for an eighth or whatever? Or do we combine with them on a special tax, which would be the equivalent, we would get the equivalent of a 16th?
General tax.
A general tax, which would be the equivalent of a 16th.
My understanding, essentially, practically speaking, a special tax is not practical.
No,
At this time.
the general tax.
No, the special tax is not practical this time. It's not impossible, but to have to go through all of the steps, it probably will be very unlikely
They're
to
the
happen.
same steps.
No, but the general tax, we're part of a bigger package, and the supervisors would be more inclined to say, yeah, we like that because we get road money.
Well, I'm not sure we can decide what the supervisor, I think what, and you folks are good, you're going to jump on me if I'm wrong, so I think what we're really basically saying is to our members who are going to meet with the county administrator, this is the range of what we'd like. In the best of all possible worlds, we'd love it if you folks let us put on an eighth of a sales tax on the ballot for the library. That's one end of the possible. The other is, how about if we join in with you folks on a road and library tax, and we would settle with your commitment to 16th? Is that basically what you want from us?
Is that your plan, David?
Well, it would be great not to have it broadcast on public TV before we went and talked to them, but sure, that's perfect. Great.
Well, we have to talk about it, though.
Right, but there's something about negotiating where you do want to figure out, what's the optimal and authorize your people to go for that and assume they will negotiate.
Okay, so the optimal...
That would be great.
All right. Sorry.
It's all right.
Well, I think we all need to be clear on it.
Okay, so do
Think
we
they have
have a
time to
sense
watch it?
from the commission?
We can't even get on.
You saying something?
No, we're just chit-chatting here.
I'm trying to get my question answered here.
Which is?
Well, I want to know if okay, so David said if we go for the 2/3, the 1/8, we have to form a committee, we have to get, we can't touch raising the money for it, which I understand that. But if we go with the county and go in with 50%, is that something somebody has to raise money for that, or is that part of the county doing the push to get it passed? That's all. That was my question.
Well, it seems logical that if we're part of the county measure, they'll have more wheels in motion.
Yeah.
And we can become a powerful ally there. If we say, look, we will really push for this tax if we get what we want out of it. And we'll give you money and we'll give you volunteers. We'll go out and pound the pavement. I think that should be attractive to them.
I just feel compelled to make a comment about general taxes. I think I remember that the county backlog on roads is $1 billion or something like that. Whatever their good intentions might be today, every single pothole that doesn't get filled will be a compelling draw on those dollars.
Yeah.
And in the hierarchy of needs, we might think the library is first, but the county doesn't. And I think we run a huge risk if we put our financial future in the hands, relying on the goodwill of the county. We need to be in charge of our own destiny.
I share that. I just don't know if, practically speaking, the county will say to us, you go right ahead and put your 1/8 of a cent on. I don't trust them any more than you do.
Well, let's ask. Let's ask for what we want. What we want is an 8-cent sales tax that's dedicated to the library.
All right.
That's what we want. It's what I want.
Okay.
Okay, how about the rest of us? That's what we want? Thumbs?
I'm still kind of confused, but
I'm
sure.
okay with
Yeah,
that.
8th, okay.
Right.
Sure.
Okay.
And the new commission will have, in the new
Yeah.
JPA, they will have the ability to put bond issues and stuff on.
That's true, but by that time, they will have the, let's say,
Not for June, not for our timeline, but for in the future.
if, I think what we're getting in terms of information is barring changes, they'll have a chance to do parcel tax,
Okay. Okay.
just given the current situation.
Let's go for it. Thumbs up.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Okay, one other just little side comment that I would be intrigued about is I'm intrigued by this particular thing, and this is the paper that's being passed out. But one other thing, data point I would be interested in is we have a $33 per capita spending on library services in our county. What is the cost annually per person for the library? That's a sum I would be interested in knowing. If it's,
Well, 15 million divided by 368,000 or whatever it is in the county.
100,000 regular users over the course of a year, Sandra Cooper told me. So you divide that by the 15 million.
Do you understand what I'm saying is what does it cost the citizens, per citizen?
Per capita funding is what it costs per citizen, per resident. It's you take the population
You're right.
and you divide the amount
The other way.
and the other way around.
It's
Whatever.
$33
But that
a
is
year.
the figure you're asking for, I think. It's $33 a year,
Okay.
right?
All right. Any further public comment on this issue? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Could I comment?
You may come down and comment, or if you want to comment from up there, you
I
may.
just wanted you to please introduce yourselves, everyone at the table,
All right.
commissioners, or to know who you are.
Okay. We can do that. I'm Tim May, Commissioner from Petaluma.
Helena Whistler, 5th District Commissioner.
David E. Bright, appointed by the City of Santa Rosa.
Mary Evelyn Arnold, 1st District.
Paul Heavenridge, I forget the district name. David Rabbit appointed me. So.
Tom Colbert, 4th District Commissioner.
All right. Moving ahead to the discussion items, the Joint Powers Agreement Committee report.
So the meeting today was probably the shortest Joint Powers Agreement Committee meeting. It was about a half an hour, and there was some language changes that had been made in the Joint Powers draft agreement that were approved and was reviewed again by all present. I'm trying to, sorry, I'm still in the polling. Just a second. Let me find my paperwork. Okay. So one of the language changes was about the joint appointment by the City of Santa Rosa and Sonoma County. And they're going to add one more thing to that, which is how that commissioner is terminated, and it's only upon agreement by both Santa Rosa and the County of Sonoma. They talked about the timeline for the effective date of the new Joint Powers Agreement. They anticipate that between now and May 21st, I believe, all the commissioners would be appointed by the cities. There would be, I have the list. Okay. And the agreement would be ratified by all jurisdictions. The process for appointment of the commissioners would be opened. Applications would be taken. All the commissioners would be appointed by July 16th. And each jurisdiction was advised to notify the library management as well as the clerk of the Board of Supervisors of their appointments. The effective date of the amended JPA will be August 1st. There will be a signing ceremony and party on August 4th, and that would be the first meeting of the new commission. Supervisor McGuire spoke specifically about training workshops for the new commissioners, which would start in late July, and David and Jamie already have a lot of the material for that training. But he also pointed out that the training would be ongoing because the commission needs remedial training from time to time. So are there any questions about that? Did I leave anything out?
Did you mention the new commission starts? Yeah.
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
Okay. Any public comment regarding
I
that?
do have one thing. I'm sorry, I forgot. They did a drawing of chocolate bars with gold coins to determine the length of appointments. And I believe, here we go. The 4-year appointments for the new commissioners went to the city of Petaluma, Healdsburg, Sebastopol, Rohnert Park, Santa Rosa, and the joint commissioner for the county of Sonoma and Santa Rosa is also 4 years. The 2-year terms will go to the county of Sonoma, Cotati, Windsor, Cloverdale, and Sonoma. And so they wanted to stagger them so that they're not all new commissioners every time. And after, I think, the initial 2-year terms are done, those cities will then get 4-year terms for their commissioners. That's it.
Any commission questions? All right. The Revenue Committee
Has not had an opportunity to meet. We've been busy.
The Search Committee. We have completed the process for this search. An offer has been extended to someone, and there are basically some contingencies and things that need to be finished. We'll announce as soon as we can, basically. But an offer has... Excuse me, is there a public comment?
Thank you. I'm sorry, Dennis Miller. How will you make the announcement? Is it online or all the reference steps or what?
I imagine we have not crossed that particular bridge at this point, but I imagine there will be an effort to be sure that the staff is advised of the appointment first, and then within, few hours, there will probably be a press release, and so that will be, and then probably on the website. But I think I think that probably is the way it'll go. Okay, any public comment? I might add that we've heard a lot of positive about the panels and the involvement in that process. Okay, commissioner comments, lab information, etc. Starting down, let's start with Helena, just for the heck of it, Tom.
Just to keep me on my toes.
Right.
So Guerneville met in March, on March 12th, and welcomed their new librarian, Nancy Sampson. They're delighted to have her. One of the highlights of the meeting was some brainstorming ideas presented by the new youth members to increase teen usage of the library up at Guerneville. And those included the suggestion of a pizza night and a movie night. And the friends indicated that they would probably be able to fund the refreshments for those. The next book sale up in Guerneville will be from April 30th to May 3rd. Then Sebastopol Library met last Wednesday. They're continuing to work on their book delivery project to Homebound in the service area. So that sounds like they're really working hard at that and coming up with some different ideas on how to handle it best. Immediately after the lab meeting, there was a public forum in which the public was asked their opinions on hours and how they were impacted by the closing, and if they could have all the hours that they wanted, which we all wish for, which would be the best days for that. So there was a lot of discussion on extending the hours on different days. They did continue to express how being completely closed on Mondays has really severely impacted pretty much everybody in the community. Ultimately, and I think David Dodd was there and he encouraged this, was to have on the wish list that if we get funding again, to have the library open from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days of the week. So everybody applauded that. It was a great idea. As you'll read in the co-director's report, the landscaping is underway for outside the Sebastopol Library. And the city has supplied $25,000 of the money for that. They still need to collect some more money because I believe they had said they needed an additional $35,000. Many volunteers are working on that, and it's starting to look very nice. The next book sale for the Friends is from May 14th through May 17th. So come on over to Sebastopol.
David.
As a new commissioner, I have very few comments to make. I have not attended any lab meetings or Friends meetings at this point. I think, Tim, you attended in my stead the day after I was appointed a commissioner. Thank you very much for that. I will say that I'm happy to be a commissioner here for the library. I'm also happy to serve as the commission's representative with David and Jamie in our initial discussions with the county administrator and staff there. And I also would like to give an appreciation to the commissioners for a warm welcome and also for their thoughtfulness and depth of questions and curiosity about the candidates we all interviewed. That seemed to be a very good and collaborative and thoughtful process. So thank you.
My lab meets this Thursday, so I don't have anything to report.
Roanoke Park, Toddy will meet later this month, so I don't have a report.
The Windsor Lab meets tomorrow, and the two things, they have taken a community library assessment report. We'll hear the assessment survey, and we'll hear the results of that tomorrow. Also, there is a planned Windsor Library open house on May 8th. And do we have another commission meeting before then? No? Okay, well, everybody will get an invitation to that anyway, May 8th. Save the date.
All right, Petaluma, I believe I said this, but Petaluma had a special meeting of their lab to approve the expenditure of special funds for this year's budget. It was a reluctant agreement to expend $70,000 for that, for the request for that. We also, interestingly enough, kind of not long enough time on it, but we had a senior just recently proposed to paint a mural on the outside of the Petaluma Library as her senior project. It became quite clear that since she needed to have it done before in the early part of May, there might not be enough time to approve and do, but she instead is doing a painting for the teen area as her senior project. Also, The Petaluma Library is really getting behind the Declaration of Rights to Libraries from the American Library Association. They're presenting to the City Council tonight, asking for them to endorse it. So that's been one of their pushes in the last couple of months. And then we now, too, have a seed library in Petaluma from the Master Gardeners. And a seed library allows you to check out seeds for the season. I don't believe there's any overdue fee. And then you bring back seeds at the end of the season to restock the seed library. The first place I heard about this was up in Healdsburg. And I loved the way they used their old card catalog for the seeds.
And there are more people fighting to get into the seed library than into any of the bookshelves.
I was impressed because they were color-coded into which are the easiest seeds to propagate and return and which are the most difficult. Good thinking there. All right. Moving on to approval of the minutes. I believe, okay. We have several minutes. We have several sets of minutes to approve. No?
No, just
one. All right. Is there a motion?
Sure.
Okay, did you get that? That was called I so move. I'm
Second.
translating for you. I so move.
Second.
Seconded. All those in favor? Aye. All right. Correspondence and press coverage. I think I would like to read into the record this comment from the patrons' comments from Central. I have occasion to use Central Library's computers as I'm not online at home. Therefore, frequently I sit close to the reference area. I often overhear the librarians exchange with their wide variety of patrons, and I'm always impressed with how we are all treated with respect and courtesy and patience by this exemplary staff. I was moved to finally write this by overhearing a very kind woman talking with a client who had a possible speech problem. She gave him all the time he needed to express himself. They, the librarians, are all extraordinarily competent and compassionate people. Thank you. Now we move to the consent calendar. There being none. So moving on to action items by motion. Do you want to fill us in on this first one, the authorize the interim directors and the Healdsburg, the pass-through payment and so forth? Somebody want to? There he goes.
Yes. The short story is, and then if you require more information, I'll go into the long story.
The condensed version.
Yeah. The Healdsburg, back a few years ago, the Healdsburg Redevelopment Agency issued some bonds for a project area. They are at a point where interest rates are favorable that if they refinance them, they'll save money. In between, now and 10 years ago, of course, redevelopment agencies have been phased out. So now you have this issue about pass-through money that was used originally to finance the 10 years ago, and pass-through money is nothing more than tax increment money that went to the redevelopment agency, and then as a result of an agreement, that money was then given back to the taxing agencies. Now you have, in essence, a pool of money that's the tax increment money, and they have identified all the enforceable debt or enforceable obligations of a particular redevelopment agency, in this case, Healdsburg. So now where we are and what we're recommending that you authorize, is that in order to obtain the lowest interest rate possible, we allow that the investors have an increased assurance that they have this pool of money available to pay the new bonds. And the way that's achieved is allowing a subordination of our rights on some of that money. The savings is not huge for the library. I mean, everybody will get a little more money because the bonds will be refinanced and the annual debt will be lower, and therefore they'll need less tax money, property tax money from the project area to pay their debt, and whatever is left over now goes to the taxing agencies. So they're going to save about $120,000 or so a year by refinancing. We'll get a small piece of that. Everybody else will get a small piece of it. I think that what it's really is agencies' obligation that wherever money can be saved, it should be saved. And that's what's happening here. The risk is, there is no risk in terms of downside risk of doing this.
Is there any reason not to do this?
No. And the reason I say that is in 2010, a similar subordination was given for the financing that's now being refinanced. So if we did nothing, the bonds, they'd refinance them, they'd go out a little higher interest rate, it would cost more, and everything would be the same, except for Hillsburg would be paying more for the bonds.
And they'd be
and
mad
we would
at
be
us.
getting less.
So I have a devilish mind.
You haven't what?
Of course, I say, let's stick it to them.
No.
No.
I have a question. Is the library the only entity that would be resubordinated,
Or subordinating? No.
Are there other
there are others
entities doing this?
at the other JPAs at the county. Principally, I think the water agency is being asked. That's the only one I do know. I did have some communication with Donna Dunk, the assistant auditor controller for the county, last week, and they were reviewing the documents on behalf of other agencies that were being asked to subordinate.
All right. Do we have a motion?
I move that the Sonoma County Library Commission approve the request, etc.
You so move.
I so move.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right. It's been moved and seconded. Before we have the vote, is there any public comment? All right. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay. The next item has to do with the timeline for the approve the calendar for reporting on the goals and objectives. All right. We've discussed this at previous meetings, but do you want to fill us in a little bit? How about Jamie?
Sure. Yay, the mic's working. So we've already approved the 5 goals and objectives for 14-15, and this is a proposed calendar of reporting. We took each goal, assigned 2 particular commission meetings throughout the course of a year for reporting on that goal, and we're proposing to use the same format that you have seen in the past at the quarterly, with the quarterly focus and finish reports. In other words, the lengthier report that shows milestones, upcoming, timelines and events and so forth.
And basically, all we're approving is the calendar of
And the
when
format,
you do
the
it, because we've
frequency
already
and the
approved the
format.
concept.
Right.
Any questions from the commissioners about that? All right, how about a motion?
I so move.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Who got there first? Paul got there first.
I was the loudest anyway.
All right. Is there any public comment regarding this? All right. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None? Okay. Passed unanimously. Okay. Our next item is the adoption of the annual resolution on funding the OPEB, the other post-employment benefits.
This is the policy on OPEB, not the funding of it.
This is the what?
The policy.
All right. This is the policy on the adopting of the policy on funding. And again, we've talked about this before.
Right, and there are 0 changes from...
Pardon me?
There are no changes to this from last year.
Yes.
Can I make a motion?
Would you like to so move?
Yes, I so move.
Tom, it's your turn.
Second.
Tom seconded. Is there any discussion from the commission before a vote? Is there any discussion from the public? There being none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So be it. Our next item, 2 items, are items of discussion. Proposed changes to the standards of behavior is the first document. Who would like to fill us in a little bit on some of these?
I will.
Okay.
So the library has a behavior advisory committee that meets a couple times a year as needed, and it's chaired by the Petaluma branch manager, Doug Sisney, who sadly will be retiring in July. Sadly for us. So the BAC committee met this past December, and they considered a number of suggestions that staff from across the county had put forth to them for them to consider changing in the library's standards of behavior policy. And they recommended a number of changes. Just to highlight the biggest ones, one would be to allow drinks into the library as long as they're capped or covered. Right now, we do not allow any drinks in the library. Adding a provision to prohibit the use of e-cigarettes.
The e-cigarettes?
Yes. Adding running to the list of unsafe activities in the library, and prohibiting children from being placed on staff desks. That's not currently in the standards. Adding more specific wording about tripping hazards associated with electrical cords. And some general rewording to the attire and hygiene section, and changing the 3 main headings. So these changes are put forth by the Behaviors Advisory Committee, and they went to the management team, who fully supports it, and now it's coming to you for discussion. And if the commission would like to adopt, we can put it on the agenda at the next meeting for adoption.
All right. Are there questions from the commission about any of these items?
They all seem very practical and real world to me.
I have a couple, if there are none other. First of all, will staff have input aside from the committee input on any
I
of
believe the Behavior Advisory Committee asked for staff input,
Okay.
and that's where these recommendations ultimately came from.
All right. I'm interested on page 1. It looks like there's a removal of the failure to comply with these standards may result in a loss of library privileges. It seems to me historically that was an important clause in some ways to, can you talk about the reasoning for the removal of that clause?
I don't personally know. Anybody in the audience know? Keo or Kathy? the reasoning behind that removal.
David looks like he is.
Well, it does say that later.
Okay.
On page 4, failure to comply with the library's established rules, et cetera, line 21, 22, it's going on down. So maybe that should just be bolded so that it stands out.
Okay. So that it was redundancy is the issue.
If your concern is that people won't know that if they do something wrong, that there could be consequences.
Okay. And I have a question, and since I am, even as I say sort of lightheartedly, even though I were an English major, I have a question on the change. It says, I guess it's page 4, any patron who violates these standards will be asked to bring their behavior into compliance. Shouldn't it continue to be his and her? If it's a single patron, it should be his, her. That's my read. So I don't think that change should be made.
Okay.
Any other comments or discussion from the commission? You know, it's too early to be this close to the end of the agenda.
No.
We can get used to it.
Yeah. We're just making up for all the other long hours.
Oh, all right.
Okay.
All right, now we're moving on to the management report. We've all read it, so we don't probably need too many questions per se. Let's go through them one by one. Oh, by the way, I forgot on the proposed changes to standard behavior if there are any public comments. I'm sorry, I apologize for that. Okay, let's go on to the monthly activities. I have a question, first of all. Bruce. Aha, thought you could go to sleep there. Will you be at the May meeting?
No.
Well, thank you for all that you've done for us for all of these months. I know that other people can chime in, but it's felt like, well, just thank you for all you've done. And I know that it's been service above and beyond, so thank you so much.
I have learned more in the 3 or 4 months that you have been here than I have in the past 3 years that I've been on the commission. So you're just great. Just were great.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. It's much appreciated, and it's been a very interesting time, and I've learned a lot about the library, and I think when I walked in the door back in the middle of October, I was about 180 degrees off on what the library does and what the service that it performs for the community. And so now I have a real clear understanding, and all we have to do is parade about 200,000 county residents through the library door, and we'll be in good shape. Thank you.
Any other commissioners want to chime in?
Well, I've said repeatedly how great it is to have your help and all the hard work you've been doing for us, and I look forward to seeing you after you get back from your trip.
Okay. And I feel like you've become a real advocate for the library, both in your time and your effort. I appreciate it.
Well, I can't just not say anything in public, so I'm going to say something, which is that I don't know if you all read the Sunday paper, but you may have noticed in the towns section on an inside page, there was a picture of a gentleman pointing up at a bay tree, which is harboring pathogens that can lead to sudden oak death syndrome, and that person was Bruce. So Bruce also sits on the board of the United Way here locally. I don't know if I've ever met anyone so competent and dedicated and giving of his time in my professional career. And I just, you feel like a library family now, and, there's always a place in future volunteer efforts.
That's right.
For you in the library. I know you're a very busy man, and we can't really count on that, but it's just been 100%, 110% great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from the monthly activities part of the monthly report?
Well, while we're complimenting people, I just want to say I'm so impressed continually by how much Jamie and David take on and get done. So thank you.
And I want to ditto that. It's been really great working with them, and they've really helped, me in getting things done, and we've worked well together.
All right, moving on to our status report on performance management reviews. Is any comments from folks on that?
Well, I look forward to the numbers changing for the better in future reports. When do we get our next report on this? Are we getting this one monthly still?
Monthly,
okay.
yeah.
Any other comments on that? Any public comment? All right. We're now on to the monthly financial report. Does the commission have any questions regarding that? The monthly financials?
So will we have a monthly financial report next month, since the new CFO will not be here till May 19th and Bruce is leaving?
Yes.
Yeah, the staff is, will prepare it, and I actually probably will have a chance to review it before I'm completely finished in my role. So, yeah, you will have it.
Thanks.
All right. I had a question that I wanted to double check. It's just clarity for me. When I look at our percentage of the year elapsed on this overall page, it says 66.7 of the year elapsed. And then on the first page summary sheet of revenue and expenditures, it shows that it's 87% of the revenues. Looks like we've gotten 87% of the revenues, and it looks like we've done 94% of the expenditures. Could you just clarify that for me?
Yeah, that's a projection or a comparison of our budget through February. So we would have taken the estimated revenue on the revenue side, or the budget for expenditures, and we would have said on a straight line basis at the end of February, here's what that percentage of the budget is, and this is what has actually happened. And so that's why it looks like, oh, we're doing pretty good here on the revenue, and oh, we got a real problem on the expenditures. That's not the case. It's actually saying that we're under expended at the end of February. If you just looked at our budget and divided it by 12 and said times 8, this is 8 months worth of budget in that column and 8 months worth of expenditures. And the same thing holds true with the revenue.
So if I understand it clearly, we by this time, if we were right on track, we would have had 100% of the revenue, but we've only gotten 87% of the revenue, and we would have expended 100% by 100% to this point, and we've only expended 94%, 95% to this point.
And that's correct.
Okay.
And of course, with the revenue side, we get
Right, they come
two big payments each
Right.
year, and
I
that
just
one's
was
coming.
interested in the difference that I didn't understand, but thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions about the financial report? Is there any public comment regarding the financial report? All right. We're at the point where we're items to include in commission notes. I believe, well, anyway, let's go on to the items to include in the commission notes for this month. Do commissioners, I think it would be, have we thanked Bruce in the commission notes? No, I think that would be important. So he could, put it up on his wall, attach it to the refrigerator door. All right. Anybody else have some? I think it's important to talk about the fact that we're proceeding, exploring the idea of a tax initiative. Any other items? None? Can anybody think
Well,
of
did we
anything?
talk about the CFO?
We
We have
Yeah,
We have already?
Right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Have we mentioned that we have made an offer to a new director?
If it went, how soon afterwards do you come out with it? A week? Yeah, we may be able to even announce the new position by the time, but if not, to say that we've made an offer. All right. The next,
I have one item.
Right.
That when the Board of Supervisors meets on Tuesday, we may have 7 commissioners.
yes, I've been trying to figure out how to do that, but I have checked with that person in the audience already, and Jennifer may be appointed at tomorrow's commission meeting, so we'll be back. Jennifer has been very active, including being the president of the Library Foundation, and she will be appointed for an interesting term since her appointment will end August 1st. But anyway, Jennifer, she has come tonight to see how it all goes. All right?
Have you
So
changed
thank
your
you,
mind?
and-
Yeah, I was going to say.
I mean, there's time to get away.
It's not too late.
Yeah, it's not too late.
All right. Time of the next meeting is May 12th at 6:30 here. Yes?
I think this is the way.
I will not be there.
I will not
I'm
be
out of
there
town.
either. I will be traveling. So, all right. We are adjourned.
All right.
Wow.
I'm shocked.
Is this the youngest
Meeting.
earliest ever?